Sound good? Oh, yeah, that sounds pretty good. All right, folks, welcome to Tahoe. Very excited to be kicking off the content today with a presentation on Programmatic 2.0, optimization for the next generation of digital advertising. I'd like to be clear that I am the opening act for the T-Mobile crew, Evan and Kelly, who will be presenting on AdTech 2.0 in just a couple sessions, so make sure you stick around for the headliner. So my name's Joe Luchs. I lead the enterprise division over at Beeswax, and we focus specifically on working directly with sophisticated marketers that want more control and transparency over their programmatic advertising. Now, control and transparency have very much become buzzwords in the industry, but we really mean it. Not to knock on anybody else, but our vision was really to replicate the functionality of owning your own tech stack in-house. Now, nobody actually wants to build a tech stack from scratch. That's rather unpleasant and often should be left to companies that focus on that. But we really wanted to give folks that complete control and transparency as if they had actually hired a team of engineers and developers and product folks to build kind of their perfect DSP in-house. Now, before we dive into our topic, which is optimization for the next generation of digital advertising, I think it's helpful to do a bit of a history lesson to help us understand how we got from digital advertising 1.0 to digital 2.0. So let's go back to the very first digital ad that was ever served. Many of you have probably seen this before, but this was a AT&T ad served on hotwire.com. Now, in today's environment, this would probably be considered clickbait, but back in the Wild West, this was quite all right. Does anyone know, and feel free to yell out, does anyone know what the click-through rate was on this ad? 80%. Aggressive guess, but actually not too far off in terms of orders of magnitude. The click-through rate on this was 44%. So if you had a rather high number in mind, this is the ballpark we were looking at. You would also be correct in assuming that this is about 440 times higher than the average click-through rate today. So then we move forward to 2000. Ad networks started to take shape, and for folks that have been in the ecosystem for a long time, this is probably a little bit of a blast from the past, but ad networks took shape to aggregate a lot of inventory and make it a lot easier for marketers and agencies to procure digital inventory at scale. But then eventually folks realized that there might be a more efficient way to approach the situation. And so auction models grew up, and we had the advent of programmatic with the first ad exchanges. Now, over the course of the next 5 years, a whole ecosystem of programmatic players popped up, DSPs, SSPs, data platforms to enrich this ecosystem, and programmatic really took off. In 2013, mobile finally broke 10 billion. In 2016, video finally broke 10 billion. And then if we're going to back out to today and where things sit, we're looking at about 70 billion just in US ad spend on programmatic by the end of 2020, and over 90% of digital ads will be served programmatically by the end of 2020. And the ecosystem is only getting more complex. Up here, you've got about 8 major formats, and there's plenty of sub-formats that sit underneath these. So the ecosystem is not getting any less complex. And the reason that we go back to this kind of history lesson is because a lot of the platforms that were built and a lot of the buying tactics that were developed were really built for that kind of AdTech 1.0 era. Now that we're in Programmatic 2.0, it calls for a different set of strategies. So what we're going to focus on today is optimization, which we at Beeswax believe is the key to success. Now, we'll quickly define optimization. I won't bore you with the full definition, but the highlight is finding the most cost-effective and highest achievable performance under the given constraints. So let's dig into why optimization is so important. Well, I think it's worth starting with the premise that about 95% of the technology that sits within any programmatic stack is exactly the same. There's not a lot of differences in how you integrate with an exchange, how you do targeting, budgeting, frequency capping, and so forth. Most of those features are very commoditized. If you read the last Forrester Wave report on DSPs, they would make that point quite clear. But that's why we want to focus so much on optimization, because we believe that data and optimization are the two key drivers of differentiation and competitive advantage in the programmatic ecosystem. So the value of optimization. Well, there's 3 key points that we want to touch on here. So business outcomes over proxy metrics, incrementality, and of course, what everyone is constantly striving for, which is return on ad spend. So let's start with outcomes over proxies. Now, if we think back to kind of the programmatic 1.0 era, often what we were optimizing towards was things like click-through rate, video completion rate. Then things grew up a little bit, and we started to want to make sure that people could actually see our ads. So viewability and time in view came to the fore. And we've always been striving for cost per acquisition and cost per install for the mobile-focused folks. But the reality is that the business outcome that we're often trying to drive is return on ad spend, customer lifetime value, offline sales for certain folks, and incrementality, which is a bit of a newer concept that I'll dive into in just a moment. So moving on to incremental performance. Well, you don't want to pay for things that were going to happen anyways. I think that's fairly straightforward. If you go onto Amazon, you buy something for $50, then you come back 2 days later and it now costs $25, that's a little frustrating. Or you can imagine you go and buy a Roku device. Then someone shows up in your office and a vendor has just sent you 20 Rokus, and suddenly you have a free one to access. Doesn't feel great. Well, the same concept applies to incrementality. You want to make sure that every dollar you're spending is actually generating an incremental action that would not have happened otherwise. And much like our previous slide focused on the business outcomes you're trying to drive, optimization can be very, very helpful in driving the incremental performance. And then the third component is return on ad spend. By having a very precise bidding strategy and optimization strategy, you can make sure that you're maximizing your return on ad spend. You can imagine if you're constantly overbidding, you're probably paying too much. If you're constantly underbidding, you're probably missing out on opportunities to show ads to users that might be very, very important to you and might be a good opportunity to drive an action. So by having that level of precision and bidding in the right fashion, you can ensure that you're delivering better return on ad spend. And from what we've seen, folks that are focused on custom optimization and have built something geared towards their needs often do see performance improvements of anywhere between 2x and 10x. So what's the way forward? Well, there are a lot of new approaches to optimization. Now, if you think about kind of the original optimization strategies, it was very much shared optimization where everyone's data was feeding into the same optimization strategy and driving, fairly similar outcomes. In a lot of cases, these were great for upper funnel metrics like clicks, video completions, and viewability. Then we moved forward, and this concept of bid modifiers came to the fore. This allowed you to take a little bit more control over your strategy and move from a fairly simplistic and non-tailored situation to having a little bit more control and a little bit more flexibility. And now the concept that we're seeing really take hold is this concept of bringing your own algorithm. Actually having a bespoke strategy that's specifically geared towards your goals and business outcomes, whether that's incrementality, return on ad spend, customer LTV, and so forth. So to help us understand why multivariate optimization is so important, and that often is the core of kind of a custom optimization strategy, I think we'll use a little bit of an analogy here. So nothing exists in a vacuum. Let's say your son is sitting on the couch watching his favorite TV show. Everything's hunky-dory. He's very happy. You as a parent, life is good. Then your daughter comes in the room. Well, as many of us know, they might have a disagreement about what TV show they want to watch. That's always a fun thing to try and regulate. Then the dog comes in. Perfect. We're saved. The dog is suddenly occupying one kid while the other one watches their favorite TV show. And then the baby comes in. Everyone loves the baby, assuming it's not crying, and everyone's happy. And so in this case, everyone's super, super happy, and these various factors came together perfectly. But what happens when you have 100 variables, 200 different variables? Each of those unique combinations can be fantastic or horrific, and many different shades in between. And that goes back to why multivariate modeling is so important, because there's so many different factors that go into any individual decision you might make. It's very, very important to make sure that you know what combinations are good, what combinations are bad, and even more importantly, being able to ascribe an individual value to those combinations. So what are the key factors of power optimization? Well, we break it down to the who, the where, the when, and the dollars. So starting off with the who, it often comes down to your users, your first-party data, making the most use of that. The where, these are various inventory factors where you're actually placing the ads. The when, which is time decay. And then the dollars, which is price data, how much you're actually going to bid for these individual auctions. Now, historically, it was always users as segments. This user is good, this user is bad, bid, no bid. In the modern era, you have the opportunity to actually value individual users and bid on them accordingly. And that can have a huge, huge impact on your ability to make the most of your first-party data. Multivariate inventory factors. Even something as simple as looking at one publisher coming from one exchange versus a different exchange can have a massive impact on the value of that individual ad opportunity for a variety of different reasons. When you factor in all the other inventory factors like the operating system, the device type, you can pick up on really powerful patterns that allow you to understand what the context is that user is seeing your ad in. And then you've got the time factor. A user that visited your website 5 minutes ago might be extremely valuable, and you might want to bid significantly higher for them to make sure that you get an ad in front of them and can remind them, hey, come back and buy our product. Versus 2 days ago, you might want to significantly decrease your bid price because there's a little bit of wear out and they're a little bit further from the previous action that they had taken. So we use a real-world example. Individual user with 3 past purchases just put $150 worth of stuff in their shopping cart. Well, you could calculate that they're going to be 3.1x the average value of your typical user. That user shows up in a programmatic auction 7 minutes later. Well, that's pretty recent. We could probably remind them to come back and finish their purchase. So they're going to be 2.4x the average. Interesting combination of inventory variables. They appear on a low-quality site, but they're in an urban geolocation, and they're on an iOS device. Well, that's coming out to somewhere around average. We calculate all these factors together, nothing in a vacuum, all of them with this unique combination, and we calculate that there's a 0.062% chance of that user seeing the ad and then converting thereafter. Now, based on historical data, that warrants a $6.24 bid. Now, as you can imagine, doing all of this manually would be a rather unpleasant task. And so when we think about how folks actually pull together this optimization, there's actually a big automation opportunity. As we think about the advent and growth of AI, machine learning, and so forth, you can do things like take all of the auction level data, the wins, the bids, the conversions, with Beeswax, the actual auctions themselves. You can combine that with your first-party data, as well as your real-world insights, because you still need a human touch. And what you can do is you can take all that information, collect and model that data, actually create the model and upload it, and then you can actually traffic those campaigns with that unique model. And in the case of Beeswax, what most of our customers are doing is automating this entire data pipeline as well as the number crunching with as little as a quarter of a data scientist's time or a quarter of an analyst's time. And once you've actually got all this automated, that makes everyone's life a lot easier because the data feeds in, the model gets smarter, and the ROAS continues to go up on its own. So key takeaways. Programmatic is more complex than ever, and it's not going to get any less complex. And so we have to be prepared to actually take that on and be smart about how we approach the new generation of programmatic. Great data and optimization is key. Again, remembering that much of the programmatic stack is very similar across platforms. Using data in the right way and having the right optimization strategy is what can allow you to win. And then flexible tech is what you need to win. So that's my plug for Beeswax. We are the most flexible and modular tech in the ecosystem. And I am, after all, up here to represent Beeswax. So if anybody wants to come and learn more about Beeswax, come and find me, my colleague John Ferraro, and we're happy to tell you a little bit more about our very flexible and very efficient platform. That's it.
All right. Joe, thank you very much. Thanks for kicking things off. Any questions for Joe while we have him here? This is your chance. Some of you have, I think, brought vegetables, tomatoes, and things to throw. No? No? Joe, you said they had vegetables, but no, they don't. So you mentioned you have a team here. Raise your hand. Where's Right here. Okay, very good. So John with Beeswax. If you have questions for these guys, grab them over the next couple of days. I'm sure you guys are in for the duration.
That's right.
Okay, very good. Anyone before we go? Okay, no problem. We got plenty of time to get these guys over the next 3 days. So we're going to take 5 minutes.